It's June 1975. A 27-year-old director sits alone on a boat off Martha's Vineyard, writing what he thinks is his resignation letter. His actors hate each other. His mechanical shark is literally rusting at the bottom of the ocean. Universal Studios executives are circling like sharks, and he's certain, absolutely certain, that his career is over. That director was Steven Spielberg, the movie that was destroying him, Jaws, the film that would accidentally invent the summer blockbuster, traumatize an entire generation, nearly kill several cast members, and become one of the most influential movies in cinema history. But here's what nobody tells you. Almost nothing about Jaws was supposed to happen the way it did. The shark wasn't supposed to barely work. The script wasn't supposed to be rewritten on cocktail napkins. Robert Shaw wasn't supposed to show up drunk. And that opening scene, the one that made millions of people afraid of the ocean, the actress's screams were real because nobody told her they were about to yank her underwater. Today we're diving deep, and I mean deep, into the true story of Jaws. The accidents, the genius, the terror, and the moments that turned a disaster into a masterpiece. Stick around, because some of these facts are going to make you see this movie completely differently. So grab your favorite snack, sit back with me, and let's rewind and reveal. Fact 1. Peter Benchley wrote Jaws because he was broke. Let's start at the beginning, and it's not where you think. Peter Benchley, the author of the Jaws novel, didn't write it because he was fascinated by sharks. He wrote it because he had a mortgage, 2 kids, and about $300 in the bank. In 1971, Benchley was a struggling freelance writer who couldn't make rent. His publisher, Thomas Congdon, advanced him money to write a book, any book. Benchley pitched several ideas, including one about a shark terrorizing a beach town. Congdon liked it. There was just one problem. Benchley spent the advance and hadn't written a single word. When his agent reminded him he'd have to return the money if he didn't deliver, Benchley panicked and threw together a manuscript. Congdon hated it, said it was too comedic, but he loved the first few pages. So Benchley spent the next year and a half writing in borrowed offices, and even a converted turkey coop. The book's title? That was a last-minute decision. They considered The Stillness in the Water, Leviathan Rising, and The Jaws of Death. They settled on Jaws because it was short and fit on the cover. Simple as that. The book became a massive bestseller. Benchley himself admitted he never thought anyone would read a book about a fish, but Universal Pictures saw something else, the birth of a new kind of movie. Fact 2. Spielberg almost didn't direct. He saw it as Duel 2. When producers Richard Zanuck and David Brown approached 26-year-old Steven Spielberg to direct Jaws, his first reaction wasn't excitement, it was skepticism. He'd just directed a TV movie called Duel, about a truck relentlessly hunting a man. When he heard about Jaws, he thought, wait, this is just Duel but with a shark. Both stories featured unstoppable mechanical beasts. Both had 4-letter titles. Both were about ordinary people hunted by something bigger and meaner. Spielberg literally called Jaws Duel at Sea. But here's the twist. That similarity almost made him turn it down. He was terrified of being typecast as the truck and shark guy. He even started eyeing another project called Lucky Lady instead. Producer David Brown had to convince him to stay. Good thing he did, because Spielberg's experience with Duel taught him something crucial. You don't need to see the monster to be terrified of it. That lesson would save Jaws when everything went wrong. Fact 3. The script was rewritten by 8 different people. Here's something wild. The Jaws script you know and love was written by at least 8 different people, and half of them weren't even credited. Peter Benchley wrote the first 3 drafts, but Spielberg wasn't satisfied. Too much like the book, which he found cold and mean-spirited. So they brought in playwright Howard Sackler for uncredited rewrites. Then Carl Gottlieb, who also acts in the movie, rewrote the entire script over 9 weeks while they were already filming. Then screenwriters John Milius, Matthew Robbins, and Hal Barwood all added pieces. Spielberg himself made changes. And Robert Shaw, he rewrote his own dialogue, including the famous USS Indianapolis speech. You know what's crazy? This usually results in a complete mess. Too many cooks in the kitchen. But with Jaws, every cook added exactly the right ingredient. The script became a perfect blend of terror, humor, and humanity. The best example? The "you're gonna need a bigger boat" line. That wasn't in any script. We'll get to that story later. Fact 4. Casting was a last-minute scramble. Picture this. It's 9 days before filming starts, and 2 of the 3 main roles aren't cast. That's the reality Spielberg faced with Jaws. For Chief Brody, they originally wanted Robert Duvall, but he would only do it if he could play Quint instead. Then Charlton Heston lobbied hard for the role, but Spielberg worried Heston's Hollywood star power would overshadow the everyman quality Brody needed. The role went to Roy Scheider, who actually got involved by eavesdropping on Spielberg talking about the movie at a party. Quint was even messier. Sterling Hayden and Lee Marvin both turned it down. Robert Shaw initially refused because he thought the book was garbage. His wife and secretary finally convinced him to say yes. And Hooper, John Voight, and Jeff Bridges were considered. But George Lucas, yes, that George Lucas, recommended his friend Richard Dreyfuss. Dreyfuss turned it down at first. Then he saw an early screening of another movie he'd just made, thought his performance was terrible, and accepted Jaws immediately to guarantee he'd still have work. Talk about right place, right time. Can you imagine this movie with a completely different cast? Fact 5, they filmed on the real ocean, and it was insane. Here's where things get legitimately crazy. Jaws was the first major motion picture ever filmed, almost entirely on the open ocean. No studio tanks, no controlled environment, just the Atlantic Ocean off Martha's Vineyard, deep, cold, and completely unpredictable. Why would anyone do this? Spielberg wanted authenticity. He got authenticity, all right, along with seasickness, equipment failures, and near death experiences. Every time a sailboat appeared on the horizon, they had to stop filming and wait 90 minutes for it to disappear. The cameras constantly rocked with the waves. Sound was destroyed by wind. Actors vomited from seasickness. The salt water corroded equipment daily. The shoot was supposed to take 55 days. It took 159 days, nearly 3 times as long. The budget exploded from $4 million to $9 million. The crew started calling the movie Flaws instead of Jaws. And the worst part, the mechanical shark kept sinking. Fact 6, Bruce the Shark was a technological disaster. Let's talk about Bruce. 3 mechanical sharks were built, each weighing 1.2 tons and costing $150,000. They were named Bruce after Spielberg's lawyer, Bruce Raymer, and they were absolute nightmares. The sharks required 14 operators to control. They constantly malfunctioned. Hydraulic fluid leaked everywhere. Motors screamed mid-scene. In salt water, they corroded instantly. One shark literally sank to the bottom of Nantucket Bay and had to be retrieved with a crane. Richard Dreyfuss famously said, "We started the film without a script, without a cast, and without a shark. But here's the thing everyone misunderstands. Bruce breaking down constantly was actually the best thing that ever happened to the movie. Because the shark didn't work, Spielberg was forced to hide it. He relied on John Williams' score, yellow barrels, point of view shots, and pure tension. And by not showing the monster, he made it infinitely more terrifying." Spielberg later said, "The film went from a Japanese Saturday matinee horror flick to more of a Hitchcock. The less you see, the more you get thriller. That's not artistic vision. That's desperation transformed into genius." Fact 7. The Orca actually started sinking with the cast inside. Remember that scene where the Orca starts taking on water and tilting? Here's something you didn't know. That wasn't acting. The boat was actually sinking. During filming, rough waves battered the hull. The pump failed. Water began flooding the deck. Roy Scheider and Richard Dreyfuss were mid-scene when the boat tilted 45 degrees. At first, they thought it was a special effect Spielberg had planned. Then the water reached their knees and they realized this is real. Chaos erupted. The boom operator threw his microphone into the ocean to swim free. Some cast members couldn't swim. Spielberg grabbed the bullhorn and shouted, "Save the actors first. The cameras can drown." They managed to haul everyone onto rescue boats. But the camera with all that day's footage went underwater. The cinematographer, Bill Butler, discovered the film stock was miraculously saltwater resistant and rushed it to development. Not a single frame was lost. After that, Spielberg wrote in his journal, "I'm not afraid of sharks anymore. I'm afraid of the ocean." Fact 8. Susan Buckley's opening scene was genuinely terrifying. That opening scene, Chrissy Watkins being attacked, is one of the most iconic moments in film history. But what you see on screen isn't just acting. Susan Buckley, the actress playing Chrissy, was genuinely terrified because nobody told her when they'd start yanking her underwater. Spielberg rigged underwater cables with crew members on both shores, gripping ropes. They pulled her violently back and forth to simulate a shark attack, but they deliberately didn't warn her when they'd start pulling. He wanted her genuine reaction of shock and fear. When that first pull came, Buckley thought she'd torn a muscle. She screamed for real, gasping for air. They pulled again, harder, from side to side. Now let me be clear. Contrary to some sensationalized accounts, she didn't lose consciousness or nearly drown, but it was physically demanding and genuinely frightening. Years later, Buckley said the experience was intense, but that she understood it was for the film. The result? Pure terror on screen. And that's what Spielberg wanted. Before we continue, let me ask you something. Are you starting to see Jaws differently? Because we're just getting started. There's a story coming up about Robert Shaw that'll completely change how you watch that famous USS Indianapolis scene. But first, if you're enjoying this deep dive, hit that like button and let me know in the comments which fact has surprised you most so far. All right, let's keep going. Fact 9. Robert Shaw and Richard Dreyfuss genuinely didn't get along. The tension between Quint and Hooper on screen, that wasn't acting. Robert Shaw and Richard Dreyfuss legitimately couldn't stand each other during filming. Shaw was a classically trained British actor in his late 40s. Tough, experienced, often drunk. Dreyfuss was a 27-year-old method actor from Brooklyn. Energetic, intellectual, and ambitious. They were oil and water. Shaw would mock Dreyfuss's weight, pressure him to do dangerous stunts, and make fun of his acting choices. He once called him a young punk who talks too much. Dreyfuss later admitted Shaw intimidated him, and not in a good way. But here's what's fascinating. Spielberg recognized their real-life hostility was actually perfect for their characters. That genuine tension you feel in every scene they share, it's real. The way Quint dismisses Hooper with contempt, Shaw actually felt that way. Ironically, they reconciled years later and became friends. But during filming, they couldn't stand to be in the same room. Sometimes the best performances come from the worst relationships. Fact 10. Shaw's USS Indianapolis speech has a tragic backstory. The USS Indianapolis monologue is one of the greatest scenes in cinema history. Robert Shaw delivers it with haunted, thousand-yard stare intensity. But the story behind how it was filmed is heartbreaking. The first time they tried to shoot it, Shaw was completely drunk. He slurred lines, forgot words, fell out of his chair. It was unusable. The crew sat in uncomfortable silence. Spielberg shot what he could, but everyone knew it wasn't working. The next morning, Shaw came to Spielberg with red eyes and visible shame. "Steve, I'm sorry. Let me do it again." That second take, the one in the movie, was delivered by a sober, focused, emotionally raw Shaw. He didn't just recite the lines, he embodied them. The pain in his eyes, the tremor in his voice, the way he stares into nothing. It's a man confronting his own demons. Here's what most people don't know. Shaw rewrote that entire speech himself. The original script had a different version, but Shaw collaborated with playwright Howard Sackler and crafted his own interpretation. He drew on his own experiences with shame, regret, and mortality. That scene wasn't just acting, it was confession.
Anyway, we delivered the bomb.
Fact 11. A real fisherman taught Shaw how to be Quint. Want to know how Robert Shaw created such an authentic portrayal of Captain Quint? Spielberg introduced him to Craig Kingsbury, a real fisherman from Martha's Vineyard who'd spent his entire life at sea. Kingsbury wasn't an actor. He'd never been on a stage. But when he spoke, his voice was thick with salt and experience. He told Shaw stories of shipwrecks, sailors dragged into the deep, the eerie sounds of metal echoing across waves. He said something Shaw never forgot. The sea doesn't eat men, it just takes back what it gave. From that day forward, Shaw began speaking like Kingsbury, laughing like him, even drinking like him. The tone, gestures, and haunted gaze of Quint all carried Kingsbury's imprint. People said Craig Kingsbury didn't just lend Robert Shaw his voice, he gave him the soul of the ocean, and Shaw carried that soul to the screen. Fact 12. "You're gonna need a bigger boat" was totally improvised. One of the most iconic lines in movie history, "You're gonna need a bigger boat," wasn't in the script. It was an inside joke that Roy Scheider improvised. Here's the context. During production, the crew constantly complained that their small supply boat was too cramped for equipment. They'd sarcastically say, "You're going to need a bigger boat" every time something went wrong: gear breaking, weather delays, someone getting seasick. It became a running gag. When Scheider had to deliver a reaction to seeing the shark up close, he remembered that joke and threw it out casually. Spielberg loved it so much he kept it in the film. Fun fact, many people misremember the line as, "We're going to need a bigger boat," but Scheider says "you're," speaking directly to Quint. It's a small detail, but it changes the meaning. He's not making a group observation. He's telling Quint, the so-called expert, that he severely underestimated what they're facing. One improvised line, 50 years of movie history.
"You're gonna need a bigger boat."
Fact 13. Ben Gardner's head was filmed in a backyard pool. After a test screening, Spielberg felt the movie needed one more scare, something that would make audiences jump out of their seats. Universal refused to give him more money, so he paid $3,000 out of his own pocket to film one additional scene: Ben Gardner's severed head popping out of the boat hole. But here's the kicker. He didn't film it on location or in a studio. He filmed it in film editor Verna Field's backyard swimming pool in California. Spielberg poured milk into the pool to make it murky like the ocean, installed underwater lights, and used a lifelike replica of actor Craig Kingsbury's head. Yes, the same fisherman who inspired Shaw. The scene took one day to shoot. When it premiered in theaters, audiences screamed and jumped so violently that Spielberg knew his $3,000 gamble had paid off. It's now considered one of the greatest jump scares in film history, and it was filmed in a suburban pool. Fact 14. The shark cage scene almost killed someone. Most of the underwater footage in Jaws was shot by Ron and Valerie Taylor, husband and wife shark experts in South Australia. To make the shark look bigger, they used a shorter stunt diver and a smaller cage. That decision almost resulted in tragedy. During filming, a real great white shark charged the cage and tore through the steel bars, thrashing violently. The crew watching from above screamed, thinking the diver inside had been killed. But here's the miracle. The stunt diver hadn't entered the cage yet. He'd been too afraid and hesitated. That hesitation saved his life. When the footage arrived in Hollywood, Spielberg watched a real shark attack an empty cage and realized he'd captured something incredible. He immediately rewrote the script. In Peter Benchley's novel, Hooper dies in the cage. But because of that real-life attack, Spielberg changed the ending, so Hooper survives. He escapes just before the shark destroys the cage. A moment that almost became a tragedy turned into cinematic magic, and Richard Dreyfuss got to live. Fact 15. Roy Scheider was actually injured on camera. In one scene aboard the Orca, Roy Scheider had to pull a cable attached to a floating barrel. A sudden wave slammed the boat, throwing him off balance. He fell forward and smashed his head on the metal deck. Blood poured down his face. The crew panicked, but Spielberg didn't yell cut. He told cinematographer Bill Butler, "Keep that shot, it's too real." Dizzy and dazed, Scheider kept acting. The blood you see streaming down his forehead is real. The take made it into the final film. Nobody stopped to help him. Nobody called the medic. Someone handed him a rag afterward, and they kept shooting. Weeks later, Scheider learned the gash required 8 stitches. Instead of complaining, Scheider simply said, "If that shot makes the audience believe it, the wound was worth it." That's the kind of commitment that built Jaws. Fact 16. John Williams' score was almost a joke. The Jaws theme, those 2 notes that trigger instant terror, almost didn't happen. When composer John Williams first played it for Spielberg, the director laughed. He thought Williams was joking. "Come on, John," Spielberg said. "Let me hear the real music." Williams insisted it was the real music. Spielberg was skeptical but trusted his friend. What Williams understood, and what Spielberg initially didn't, is that simplicity creates primal fear. 2 notes. That's it. But those 2 notes mimic a heartbeat. They build tension through repetition and acceleration. They become the shark itself. The score became so iconic, it won the Academy Award for Best Original Score. The American Film Institute ranked it the 6th greatest film score of all time. And it all started with Spielberg laughing at what would become one of the most famous pieces of music in cinema history. Fact 17. The film's rating controversy nearly sank its success. Jaws was originally rated R by the MPAA, which would have limited its audience significantly. Universal desperately wanted a PG rating to maximize box office potential. But the film was violent, bloody, and terrifying, so they made strategic cuts, an extended shot of the shark eating Alex Kittner, the man with the severed leg dragging himself while bleeding, and several other gruesome moments. But even with cuts, the MPAA was hesitant. According to one account, Spielberg made a clever argument. One of the main bases for an R rating is the fear that kids will imitate dangerous behavior, but kids aren't going to start swimming around eating people. Whether that argument actually swayed them or not, Jaws got its PG rating. The result? Kids could see it, families could see it, and the box office exploded. It's remarkable that a film this terrifying was rated PG. It certainly wouldn't be today. Fact 18. Spielberg fled the set on the final night. By the final night of filming, after 159 grueling days, the cast and crew were exhausted, half mad, and ready to celebrate. But they also wanted revenge on the young director who'd put them through hell. Rumors spread among the crew. "When we wrap, we're throwing Spielberg into the water." Spielberg heard the whispers. He knew they were serious. So the moment he yelled cut for the final scene, he vanished. No wrap party, no photos, just the sound of helicopter blades as Spielberg escaped Martha's Vineyard. Years later, he laughed about it. "I loved them, but I knew they'd do it. I just didn't want to be their next shark." The film ended, not with celebration, but with its director fleeing for his life. Fact 19. This movie created the summer blockbuster. Here's something crucial to understand. Before Jaws, Hollywood didn't release big movies in summer. Summer was considered a dead zone, a dumping ground for lower quality films. The prestige movies came out at Christmas for award season. Jaws was supposed to premiere in December 1974, but production delays pushed it to June 1975. Universal figured they'd cut their losses and hope for the best. Then something unprecedented happened. Jaws opened wide in 409 US theaters, more than any film before it. Universal spent millions on TV advertising, a first for movies. They created a marketing blitz that made Jaws unavoidable. The result? Lines around the block, sold out shows for weeks, people seeing it multiple times. Jaws made $7 million in its opening weekend, a record. It stayed in theaters for months, eventually earning $472 million worldwide on a $9 million budget. It became the highest grossing film of all time, until Star Wars 2 years later, which was also a summer release, by the way. Jaws proved that summer could be blockbuster season. It changed Hollywood economics forever. Now every studio chases that summer gold mine, and it all started with a malfunctioning mechanical shark. Fact 20. Spielberg developed a lifelong fear of the ocean. After Jaws became a global phenomenon, Steven Spielberg didn't celebrate by taking a beach vacation. He avoided the ocean entirely, for nearly a decade. Just hearing waves made him freeze. He'd hear John Williams' theme in his head every time he got near water. For 10 years, he refused to swim in the ocean, even on family trips. That fear seeped into his later work. The stormy chaos of Close Encounters, the roaring dinosaurs of Jurassic Park, they all pulse with the same heartbeat as Jaws, the fear of nature's power, the terror of being hunted. Spielberg once admitted, "I never really left the Orca. I just turned it into a spaceship, a theme park, another nightmare." The shark stopped swimming on screen, but in his mind it never stopped circling. Fact 21. The Orca was destroyed. And Spielberg was heartbroken. Years after Jaws, Spielberg returned to Universal Studios hoping to see the Orca, the boat that symbolized one of the greatest challenges of his career. What he found broke his heart. The Orca had been sold to a fisherman in Los Angeles after filming. Universal bought it back for 10 times the price once Jaws became a hit. But when Spielberg arrived at the studio to see it, he was told, "We got rid of it, cut it up with chainsaws." Nobody at the studio even remembered where it had been stored. An employee shrugged, "We needed space for a camera truck." Spielberg stood in silence. No anger, no shouting, just a quiet sigh. Then he said a line people still quote, "They don't understand. This was the corpse of a dream. The Orca is gone. But in our minds, it still sails endlessly on the waters of 1975. Fact 22. Peter Benchley spent his life atoning for Jaws. Here's one of the most important stories about Jaws, and it's rarely told properly. Peter Benchley, who wrote the novel, spent the last 30 years of his life trying to undo the damage his book caused. After Jaws premiered, shark killings worldwide skyrocketed. Fishermen organized shark hunting contests. Beachgoers demanded sharks be eradicated. Public fear turned into a massacre. Benchley was horrified. He realized his fictional story had created real-world tragedy. For the rest of his life, he became one of the world's most passionate shark conservation advocates. He wrote books and documentaries educating people about shark behavior. He fought for marine protection laws. He spoke at conferences, explaining that sharks are not mindless killers. They're apex predators, essential to ocean ecosystems, and they rarely attack humans. In interviews before his death in 2006, Benchley said Jaws was entirely fiction. In writing it, I consciously exaggerated shark behavior. I couldn't write Jaws today. We know so much more. Sharks don't target humans. We're not on their menu. He added, I created the world's greatest fear. Now I have to spend my life erasing it. It's a powerful redemption arc. The man who made millions fear sharks became their greatest defender. Fact 23. Richard Dreyfuss developed anxiety after Jaws. Richard Dreyfuss was barely in his 20s during Jaws. Energetic, excited, grateful for the opportunity. What he didn't expect was that the experience would leave him with chronic anxiety. For years after filming, Dreyfuss said he couldn't go near the ocean. Every time he heard waves, he'd see Robert Shaw drunk and glaring at him. He'd remember the tension, the fear, the cold. I dreamed he was standing at the end of the boat, waiting for me, Dreyfuss recalled. And I didn't know if it was Quint or Shaw. The real tension on set, the fights, the hostility, left Dreyfuss terrified of water scenes, and even the smell of machine oil. When Jaws made him a star, he admitted, I was supposed to feel happy, but I just remembered the cold and the loneliness on that boat. Fame came quickly, but the cost was a fear that never fully faded. Fact 24. The Academy Awards snubbed Spielberg, and he filmed his reaction. When Oscar nominations were announced in 1976, Steven Spielberg was so confident he'd be nominated for Best Director that he filmed himself watching the announcement with friends. You can see the excitement on his face, the anticipation. Then his name wasn't called. You can watch the exact moment his expression changes. The confusion, the hurt. His friends look uncomfortable. Nobody knows what to say. Jaws received 4 nominations and won 3 Oscars: Best Editing, Best Sound, and Best Original Score. But Spielberg got nothing. It's honestly painful to watch. This man had just made one of the most influential films in history, a movie that changed Hollywood, and the Academy ignored him. But here's the ending. Spielberg would go on to win 3 Academy Awards for directing and be nominated 8 times. He became one of the most celebrated directors of all time. The Academy missed their chance in 1976, but history did not. Fact 25. Martha's Vineyard is forever changed. Martha's Vineyard, the island that became Amity, is forever tied to Jaws. Every summer, tourists arrive hoping to see filming locations. Tour boats run Jaws trips. Local businesses cash in on nostalgia. But the island's relationship with the film is complicated. Many locals remember the disruption, the 159-day invasion that brought chaos, noise, and Hollywood egos. Robert Shaw famously insulted the island on TV during filming, calling it incestuous and isolated. That didn't go over well. Yet the film put Martha's Vineyard on the map. It became a cultural landmark. And despite the complications, the island embraces that legacy. You can still visit the beach where scenes were filmed, see props in local museums, and feel the history. The island became famous for a shark that was never really there. So here we are. 25 facts about a movie that almost destroyed everyone who made it, and then became one of the most important films ever created. Jaws wasn't just a shark movie. It was a revolution. It changed how movies were made, marketed, and released. It invented the summer blockbuster. It traumatized a generation, and it turned a 27-year-old director who thought his career was over into one of the greatest filmmakers in history. 50 years later, the ocean has washed away the crew's footprints. But every time those 2 notes play, we still shiver, not because we fear the shark, but because we know the real terror has always lived inside us, and the camera simply captured it. So, have you watched Jaws yet? Tell us in the comments what you think about it. Which of these facts you already knew, and what surprised you most? If you haven't, go watch it when you get the chance, and then come back to tell us about it. And if you like this video, hit that like button. Subscribe for more deep dives into films that changed everything. Thanks for watching.